This time on Poll Hub, global warming is a huge topic for the world, and pollsters have taken note for a long time. We've been asking Americans about this for years, but a team at Yale is looking at the data in a different way. We're going to look at this tool that's available for everybody and discuss what it means. Then, our America Now Index is back. After a year of nearly monthly indices, we are relaunching with a quarterly America Now Index. We're going to explain why we made the change and then take a look at what our brand new numbers show about how Americans are feeling about things right now. And then the fun fact this week is very on point with America still in the throes of this thing called the Great Resignation. There's a tease. Stick around. We'll get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Miringoff.
One of the biggest topics that we poll on, and virtually every polling organization, not just in the US, but really around the world for the last, decade at least, has been global warming, climate change. And we've asked tons of questions about this to gauge where Americans, what Americans are thinking about all kinds of aspects of this. So none of that is new, right? We know that there's a lot of polling about global warming. There is something new, though, that's really fascinating that we came across. And it's a project that allows you to look a lot more, let's say, granularly at public opinion and with regards to global warming. And this project is out of Yale University, and Dr. Jennifer Marlin is the director of this and joins us now. Thanks for coming up.
Thanks for having me.
So just let me make sure I get the title right. You're a research scientist at the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale, and this is where the Yale Climate Opinion Maps are produced for the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication. A lot of words.
Indeed.
That's a big business card.
The name of our school actually changed. It's now the Yale School of the Environment.
Good.
And the Forest School is within it. So we encompass everyone a little bit more accurately now.
So tell us about this project, because it's a tool, and we're going to put let me say right off the top, we're putting it in the show notes so everybody can go and see this. But basically what you've done is there's a whole series of questions about global warming, and we can look at opinion all the way down to the county level and all the way up to the national level. Why would we want to do that?
That's a great question. And yes, all 3,142 counties have data on people's climate opinions. And the reason that you would want to do that is if you live in a particular county in Colorado or Kansas, and maybe you're a journalist in that county or an educator, or you're working at a museum, you want to know what the people in your community think, because it turns out that there is a lot of spatial or geographic variation in people's attitudes, as we know, but now we have the actual data.
So, this is a really interesting and very important use of survey data, research science and modeling. Our audience, as well as us, we like to drill down into the kind of the dark and dirty elements of how this gets put together. So can you give us a sense of, what is the basis of the data that is used in this, and how did it really all come about and continue? Because I think what's really important is that this has been something you've worked on and has been put together for a long time, but is being updated regularly as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it does get a little bit dark and dirty in there, but hopefully not too dirty. But it's true. We've been collecting data on the same set of climate questions for 12 years. And these are, twice a year surveys of at least 1,000 people, nationally representative. And after about half a dozen years, we had an idea, and this is actually, it's a collaborative effort, as you can imagine. Peter Howe at Utah State University and Matt Mildenberger at UC Santa Barbara now. They were PhD students and postdocs at Yale, and working with Tony Leiserowitz, our director, and myself, we realized that if you pooled all this data and borrowed some techniques from political science and other fields, you could combine the underlying survey data with information about where people lived, with some census data, demographic data, like sex, age, education, race, and some other census variables, and of course, political variables for those geographic areas. You could pool all this data together and essentially build a model that estimates people's opinions for a given geographic area. And so we had accumulated enough data to build the model and to make the estimates. And it really was an innovation, but we weren't sure how accurate it would be. And so, of course, we had to validate it. And so that same year, we decided it was looking pretty good. So we were going to independently collect statewide representative surveys for 4 states and 2 cities and see how good the model was doing. And it turned out that it was surprisingly accurate. And in some cases, we weren't, we could also compare it against what we call disaggregated data for a particular state. Like we could look at the big states like Texas or Florida or New York and just take the average response for those states. And for the big states, it didn't make much difference, but where you really get the value is in the small states where you just can't get good estimates otherwise.
Exactly. And you're right, very innovative use of both data, survey data and modeling. So what do we know about Americans' perceptions of climate change?
We've learned so much, and there is a lot of research activity, a lot of scholars collecting a lot of data and synthesizing data. I think we all have learned how important politics are in driving opinions. And so some of the patterns in our maps really highlight how closely climate opinions are tied to political opinions. But we've also learned that there are other factors at work here. And so it's just one example. If you look at the county level maps for, let's say, how worried are you about global warming? If you look in the southernmost counties in Texas, where there are very high proportions of Latinos, then we see really high levels of worry and concern about climate change. And that's really not driven as much by politics as it is by Latino culture. It turns out they are the most worried group among all racial and ethnic groups in the U.S. And so those kinds of patterns really pop out on our maps.
Yeah, as I look at what you do professionally, short of being a public health scientist working on vaccines and COVID, I've got to think you have a high frustration tolerance, because what you know is so important, and yet people are aware of it, but then you get up against this political roadblock. So tell me about your frustration tolerance. I mean,
I think this is the best question I've ever gotten.
Well, right now, science, research, global warming, you almost touch all the polling. You've got all the wrong things. So tell me how you put it all together.
Well, yes, and now I'm looking at extreme weather, which is even more frustrating because we look at, we've asked the question, do you think you've experienced global warming? And you have, 70% of Democrats or more, and 28% of Republicans say they have. And so it's as if we're living on a different planet here. But unless you really think about it and think about how people are interpreting that question differently and on and on. But yeah, there are really important public health implications, implications for climate change mitigation and adaptation, for climate justice. And so I think, that's why we continue to invest in building the tool and trying to help people understand and understand where they can invest their own communication efforts and, what challenges they're going to face in some areas and where there are opportunities in other areas.
How much of this is the language of how we talk about it? Because I did notice your questions do refer to this as global warming, but the language has changed so much, and we struggle with that as pollsters and as survey researchers.
It is a moving target, isn't it? Yes, and we have to maintain the wording, of course, because we're pooling our data and we want it to be consistent over time, and it is a constraint. But we did compare,
We do know that feeling, you know.
Yes, you can relate. We did a test where we did half of our sample got global warming, half got climate change. It was back in 2014, so it's a little time ago, and it turns out that the language did make a difference. People were actually more worried about global warming and more likely to associate the term global warming with human activities. Because climate change, of course, well, maybe you're talking about anthropogenic climate change, but maybe you're just talking about geological climate change. So global warming was more emotionally engaging, but of course, climate change has become more common over time. And if you look at Google Trends data, you can see that more people say climate change now than global warming. I think ultimately, most people know what you're talking about, regardless of which phrase you use. Global warming can be a little bit more of a political trigger, perhaps. And so I think people, prefer climate change. But now we hear climate disruption and global weirding and climate crisis. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Before we go, I just want to give a couple of numbers that I was playing with the tool, and I invite everybody who's a listener to go to the site and to do this, but I was looking, for instance, at the basic question, is global warming happening? And the range is from a high of 83% yes in DC to a low of 59% in West Virginia. 72% is the American number. Risk perceptions. Do you believe that it's going to harm you personally? That ranges from a high of 53% in DC to a low of 30% in several states. But then there's places where there's agreement. I think you hinted at this a minute ago. 86% of Americans agree there should be funding for renewable energy sources research, and the range is only from 82 to 91%. It's really narrow. So it seems like there is some discouraging news in here, but when you dig around, there's actually some hopeful things as well.
100%. Yes. In fact, the views towards renewable energy, clean energy, towards support for, giving tax rebates for putting solar panels on your roof or installing them in public schools. There is stunning agreement across the political divide, across every state and county. Strong support. The map just turns bright red and dark orange when you look at these questions, and that is truly encouraging. We agree more than any of us would guess. Even those of us who know the number, I think, know the numbers.
This is the ultimate in that we are a global community, whether we like it or not. What do you do with some countries who aren't on board, like Russia, China, major users? How is the progress occurring globally to raise awareness and to address issues?
We are starting to collect more data internationally. And I think what would surprise most people in the US is that the US is on the lower end of engagement and support. Most other countries are actually going more aggressive in this direction, have stronger support among their public. And so, I think we can focus at home for now and get more on board with the international community than spend our time worrying about them.
We have our own work to do.
Exactly.
And this is just an awesome example of, I think, the effect of imagery. And you guys have done a really great job in taking data that we tend to see in a lot of different, in a different venues, silos, perhaps, and really giving us a way of understanding it. And as Jay mentioned, absolutely go in, play with the tool. And I also might add, look at the questions, because I think your questions, you deal with a number of different areas, people's beliefs, their perceptions of risks, policy, what they're actually doing, their behaviors. It's really an excellent characterization and just summary of the issue.
And yes, you can have a snowstorm and global warming. Okay, they're not incompatible. In fact, there's a relationship at a certain level between the two.
There's a few senators you need to convince the truth of that, Lee, but good luck with that. Dr. Jennifer Marlin, thank you so much for coming on. The project is the Yale Climate Opinion Maps. We put a link in the show notes. And again, as Barb said, as I've said, we've all said, go play around with it. It is a great tool and it tells us a lot. Thanks so much again for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So it's back, the America Now Index. We had been doing this monthly for a while during the pandemic, and now we have moved to a quarterly look at Americans' outlook. So, who wants to explain what we're doing going forward? Jay, this has been your baby for a while.
Well, I don't know if that. What we discovered in doing a monthly index was things weren't changing very much, even in the midst of the pandemic, where changes really were in the heart of the pandemic. Big changes were happening monthly, but they weren't necessarily reflected in people's attitudes and opinions in our index numbers. There was movement, but not huge movement. And so we stepped back and said, well, how can we make this more useful for people to understand what Americans are thinking about these four key areas we talk about: the economy, health, community, and then society and government. And so we have moved to a quarterly model, which is much more common. There's also annual models for indexes or indices, depending on which way we want to pluralize that. And so we've gone to a quarterly model, and we think that's going to provide really good data, as we have before, but maybe in a way that is slightly more useful for folks who are trying to understand how Americans are feeling about these issues. So we're at 6.5, and that is unchanged since the last time we did the index in June. It was 6.5 in May of 2021. Is that a good thing, good sign, or a bad sign?
Well, there's a lot going on under the hood. Lee, do you want to?
Well, I would just say that, I would just add to this and say that we're going through so many cataclysmic events in our country, in the political realm, in healthcare, in the economy. I mean, you name it. This has been, a roller coaster period for us. And what I was struck by is, yes, there's movement under the hood in the jobs picture, and whether people think there's a health risk to them right now, given that we're at a vaccine period. But when you look at the aggregate, what I'm struck by is how locked in Americans are. We haven't done this in several months, and I was really expecting much more in the overall picture, because there's, we have a new president, we have a new Congress, we have vaccines. I mean, there's a whole, the job, employment situation couldn't be any more eventful right now. And yet, sort of like, the big changes over time, over the years, but not so much in a short term. I don't know. That was just my impression.
Well, what I found interesting, and you do point this out, Lee, is the whole job picture. In the throes of the pandemic, when we were in the middle of lockdown last year, those numbers were absolutely abysmal. They were very, very low. And that has rebounded. And we have seen that rebound over the year. And I think what was particularly interesting is the fact that many Americans now actually do think that jobs are available.
Mm-hmm.
There is a sense that the job market has gotten much better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that because we also measure, a number of other factors, there are kind of intervening issues here that Americans are looking at. I was also struck by the fact that, everything is pretty steady on kind of the health part of the index. But other than the fact that there's little risk to health right now, and I was surprised to see that actually came down as we're approaching, particularly in the Northeast, the cooler months, and people are moving indoors.
Yeah, there's two things that strike me here, that when we talk about the national conversation and how this can help people understand what bigger picture things that are going on and how we're discussing them. There's been a lot of talk, especially after the Virginia race and New Jersey gubernatorial races, in which Republicans, won one race and nearly won another, and in lots of other smaller races around the country, that the economy is doing really, really well, but Americans don't feel it. And I think that shows up exactly here. Jobs are the highest number we've ever seen, but are the next few months financially good for my family? Is this a good time to make investments? Is it good right now? And there's a lot more concern there. That number is down. And that same thing on health. There's more vaccinations. Kids are getting vaccinated. All of that at the same time. And we were in the field before this started, but there's probably a perception of this already that was taking hold. We bottomed out at about 70,000 new infections a day about 10 days ago. And it has been inching up everywhere in almost every state since. And there was a fairly dramatic increase in the last report in the last 24 hours as we record this on Thursday. I think Americans perceive that, and the fact that, there's, the other questions on health are fine. Yes, my health care is good. I'm, feeling good and all that. Is there little risk to my health right now? It's hard, I think, for Americans to feel confident about that when the mask mandates are still being litigated literally in court and culturally every day on Fox News and MSNBC. And these numbers continue to not improve in the way that we want. We were down to 10,000 new cases a day not that long ago. We bottomed out at 70,000 and are at 90,000 plus, going back up towards 100, it looks like. I understand why Americans in this index are not feeling great about the risk to their health.
Well, the other thing too is I think we're, for places that were hard hit, I think we're, not only opened up, but we're opening up as individuals as well, doing more things that were routine 2 years ago. And with that, I think there's also a sense and a perception of risk, even though things are feeling a little more normal, at least with regard to routine.
But it's been such a couple of years. The long-term impact of this on people and how they feel about all of these issues, all the components to our index, it's going to take a while for everything to sink in. I feel that it's hard to stay connected and engaged on these kinds of critical issues when the news has been just pounding at us for so long and so much seems at stake. It's hard.
And keep in mind, we do this on a scale of 0 to 10. So 6.5, that's to quote Mike Conti. 5.7, meh. On the economy, we're at a 5.7. That's not even a meh. At health, we're at 7.2.
But it's come a long way. Come a long way.
So on health, we're at 7.2, community 7.4, but society and government has been steady throughout this at 5.6. And those questions relate to a lot of the cultural turmoil and the governmental turmoil that we're seeing, the political turmoil, I should say. These are not great numbers. We've been sitting here for 18 months at a certain level, and it's steady, but this is steady at a not great level, not super optimistic. And I think that's worth noting.
The glass can be half full or half empty, depending on where you are on these things. And we've seen that. Jay, I just want to mention that you've mentioned Mike Conti before, and we probably should at some point have him on as a member of our staff to talk about his great...
To defend himself?
Yeah, his great vocabulary and things like that. And we're talking, again, a difficult segue, but moving to the fun fact.
Well, actually, your fun fact,
it does tie in.
Is quite interesting and does very much relate to what we're seeing in the index.
Okay, but I want
and what we're all experiencing.
Yeah, but I want people to know that this is not something I'm wishing for from the staff at the Marist Poll. But anyway, if you were to quit your job, and so we're making that very conditional, what would you like most to do with your free time? Travel, pursue a hobby, spend more time with family and friends, start another job, as little as possible. This was something the CBS News poll did in March of 2019.
Yeah, before pre-COVID.
Just right about the cracking point. I know what I would do, okay, because my vocation and avocation are the same. So if I quit my job, I'd probably volunteer to do what I'm doing. Okay, that's a real loser answer.
Oh, well, should we,
Don't tell the
yeah, I was about,
don't tell the new president of Marist.
So Jay, Barb, jump in, and then we'll find out what the rest of you guys think.
well, what I thought was really interesting here is that this.
I didn't tell the numbers.
Yeah,
You might as-
this survey was done pre-COVID, and just a little more than a third of Americans, 36% said if they were to turn in the keys to their office, they would want to travel. I thought also something really interesting was that 1 in 5 actually would just start another job. And I wonder, we're 2 years out from this poll, and when I was looking at these numbers, I actually feel like we're living these numbers now in terms of the churn and the transition that people are making post-pandemic.
And I think people would say where 19% said spend more time with family and friends, I suspect that would be up now, because that's one thing people were missing during the last year and a half.
So Barb, what would you do?
Well, the thing is, I think, having a job actually keeps me kind of, on track. I think I would be even probably, busier and get into much more trouble if I didn't have a job, because I do have a lot of.
You would pursue your hobby.
I have a lot of interest. So, well, probably in something related to that hobby, that horse hobby of mine.
I would travel or start another job. I have changed jobs several times after a long career as a journalist, and I kept starting other jobs. So I think my track record is sadly clear.
Well, but you have done a lot of traveling as well.
I have done a lot of travel too. Yeah, Ashley.
I would.
Now I just want to interrupt. You're a senior in college, so you haven't really had a job to quit yet. You haven't even started your career. So
well, she's been working with us for quite some time.
it is, but this is a somewhat presumptuous question. But anyway, I'm interested. Go for it.
It would have to be a mix of like travel or start a new job, because what I want to do for my career, I want to be able to travel with it, because I focus on a lot of international relations and global politics. So I'm hoping my job is like a combination of that. So I always need to be doing something. So I would most likely start a job, but try and find one that could take me somewhere different.
Yeah, and Marcelo, that's not of any interest to you, traveling. Good morning, you're in Hawaii. Go on.
You're already living the dream. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I guess traveling is checked off for me.
So if you quit, and don't, please, because then this podcast won't get edited, what would you do?
Well, ideally, I'd get a winning lottery ticket and figure it out, but probably just start on hobbies a little more seriously.
All right. And Casey, please don't quit on us, because you make this place run. But if you did, what would you do?
I'm 100% with Barb. I'd turn my hobby into a career.
And which is?
Art illustration.
So if you painted horses, then Barb and you would just be like,
there we go. We'll just open up a business, Casey.
Yeah, I have to find a way to pay the rent. Well, anyway, this one certainly did, hit a chord with folks. That'll do it for Poll Hub this week. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinek and Marcello Bettman. If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other like-minded listeners find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions, tweet them at us at Marist Poll. Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released. We'll see you next time.